2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Over. This is Stan Tinsley speaking. This is September the 5th, 1990. I'm speaking with Mr. Charles E. Murphy of 101 Maple Lane in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. We'll be reviewing Murphy's background in World War II. Mr. Murphy, what did you do before you went into the service?
I worked as an engineer trainee at Lockheed Aircraft in Burbank, and I lived in Hollywood, California.
Okay, to back up a little bit, that's my area there. Where did you go to high school and college?
Well, I'll start way back. I was born November 26, 1917. I entered a military school at age 5 called McDonough School, Maryland. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland. Graduated from McDonough and applied for West Point. In those days, you had to have 20/20 vision without correction, and I found my right eye was not quite up to snuff. So I worked a year as a millwright at Western Electric Plant at Point Breeze, Maryland. I decided that I wanted to become an engineer, and after discussing it with the personnel people at Western Electric, I found that University of Tennessee was rated quite highly in the engineering field, and was apparently a school that was not quite as expensive as some of the others. So I made application and was accepted, and immediately went down to Knoxville, Tennessee. After 4 years, I graduated with a BS in electrical engineering and a commission in the reserve as a second lieutenant. Then I went to, I was offered a job at Lockheed Aircraft in California. I worked with Lockheed until Pearl Harbor hit. Of course, it was in December in 41. I went in and told them that I was going to well trained and therefore I was going on active duty. They told me no way I could if they had me blocked. And I said, just watch me. In January, I was given orders to report to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and the engineering refresher course. I completed that course and had a training company for a while, and then reported to the 1st Infantry Division, 1st Engineer Combat Battalion at Camp Blanding, Florida. Spent a good deal of time. This being an old unit, they were being cadres to hell. They just pulled out officers and NCOs that had been with the unit, and then we'd get replacements, and you had to start retraining all over again. We had enough old line people, and the majority of our senior officers were schooled and had been about. We spent some time on beach landings, and then on up into Fort Benning for the air ground maneuvers. Fort Benning, we went to Indiantown Gap, and in August we sailed for England. This is still all in 42. Stayed in England, I'd say, well, we got there August. It took us 5 days, and the whole damn division went over on Queen Mary. There was 15,000 troops on a ship that normally held at maximum 7,500. So that was and we sailed, we had no escort whatsoever. We just relied on the ship's speed. We got to England in about 6 days. And of course, rumor was rife what we were going to do. We had no idea where we were going or what we were going to do. Well, we spent the time between time we arrived in England. We went to Tidworth Barracks, which had been an old cavalry post. And of course, we had to almost reorganize to fit in the way they were set up. They had battalion messes, and we're used to company messes, and there was no training ground similar to what we were used to, so we just almost reorganized there. Then we went up to Roseneath, Scotland. Near battalion did, and we practiced landings at night on that rough Scottish shore when the temperature was just above freezing. And if you can imagine climbing down a 70-foot cargo net in the dark, full field equipment, and trying to jump into a landing barge with the sea going, in 1 minute you would be feet below the net, and the next minute you would be 4 feet above, and you had to scramble to keep from getting crushed against the side of the ship. But after that training, we got to the point where we could handle that very, very quickly. We didn't have anybody badly hurt. We had a few with broken ribs and falling and that sort of thing. Then, after we left Roseneath, we assembled for a full division rehearsal in which the commandos acted as enemies, the British commandos. And they were firing blank ammunition. I think there were a few live rounds in that because we had some men wounded. Then we loaded up. We still had no idea where in the hell we were going to go. And this was a huge armada. Headed south on the Atlantic. I guess, about 4 days out, they briefed us that we were going to make a landing on North Africa. And roughly it went, Patton's organization was in Casablanca with 2nd Armored and one of the other infantry divisions, and I could dig that out for you. The first was to hit at Arzew and to take the Oran. The British were going to hit at Algiers. Well, things were tipsy-turvy. You didn't know whether the French would fight or they wouldn't fight. And that's the way it was when we hit. Some, especially the Foreign Legion, they fought like hell around St. Cloud. St. Cloud, we'd call it. And I lost half of my, I was platoon leader then, lost half of my platoon there. It was a good battle. That lasted about a day and a half. And then we went streaking toward Oran. And in 3 days we had Oran pretty well buttoned up. But still there was this political battle going on, whether they were going to take Vichy orders, which of course their senior officers were in Paris and under the Germans and the Vichy government. And then there was this group of Free French under General Leclerc who wanted the whole group to go. Well, we'd been there, I guess, about 2 weeks. Our equipment had come in totally now. And we were in heavy training, especially on bridging mines and anti-mine warfare, etc. Our line was assassinated, and everything went Free French. Well, immediately we were sent to Tunisia. Now, the picture there was quite cloudy. The British 8th Army, of course, was pushing Rommel. They had gotten on the offensive, was pushing Rommel westward. His supply line stretched all the way through to along the Tunisian coast and out across the Straits of Messina. There was a thin British line of British, French, and God knows what all, there holding them. They couldn't push westward, although they were pushing against it constantly. When we first got to Tunisia, we were put in piecemeal. Every time there'd be a thrust, a unit would be carved out and sent to block that thrust. So we were not under our own command. Oftentimes we're taking orders from the French through the English, or the other way around, from the English through the French.
Okay. Go again. Go ahead.
This was in early 1943. The first time we really got pulled together as an American unit was the attack on Gaza. Rommel had sent a strong force to try to break through the line there at Gaza. To the north, that was the most southern part of the line, and you were right into the Sahara. To the north, the British and Americans were establishing a tremendous base of supplies at Tabessa. This was to, when the 8th came in, to furnish them rather than try to furnish them from way back in Egypt as they had been furnished. Well, the Gaza, being the first American assault, was against pretty heavy German concentration. This other time, as I spoke of, we were piecemeal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was under a complete American command and had one complete American red, the 16th, and our engineer battalion and a couple of battalions of artillery. Well, it was a textbook bit. We just wiped them out. And they headed on north. Well, from there, they raced their whole division. Oh, no, we'll see. Then we got into El Ghoutar. We went in there as a whole division at El Ghoutar, and we met the 10th Panzer Division and completely decimated them. And now the Germans were really getting worried about it. Before, they sort of fluffed us off.
No.
Well, after El Ghoutar, they raced north with what was left of this Panzer Division to try and block any further following. They moved our division in 3 days, 800 miles to Bizerta. Now, you can imagine what we were doing. We were racing at night, running. You didn't know where the hell you were. You were over roads. You no maps, no anything. You just followed your leader, and we worked at night with little tiny pin lights, because, you know, the Germans had full air superiority. And they come in, and we were being strafed in all of these beds and bombed constantly. Well, we got to Bizerta.
Why did the Germans have air superiority at that time?
There was no other planes.
And the American planes had not
Hell,
been
you never saw an American plane. The whole time I was in Africa, I never saw an American plane. Anyhow, we bottled them up there and had a huge fight around Bizerta, which cut their supply lines totally. And the African Corps surrendered. I think we took over 100,000 prisoners there. And most of them were, the way we put them in, I'd have one engineer private, directing a colonel in charge of a German regiment building a compound to hold the Germans. We were spread that thin.
What was the attitude of the German prisoner of war at that time?
I was amazed. He had more discipline in defeat than we had in victory. They took orders from, they saluted American private. They took orders and worked very, very well. Now, this was a group that they later shipped to the United States. And you hear about them, and they had discipline over here.
Right.
In fact, I've heard tales. I wasn't there. I've heard tales where 8 or 10 of them get left on a work detail when the truck pulled up, and they'd run to go catch up to get back on the truck.
I've heard people at some states say there was certainly nothing subservient about them either. They thought they were still going to win.
Oh, yes. They were convinced
Right.
this was just an aberration.
Right.
Well, after that was over, we moved back along the coast of Algeria. Pretty nice area there, and my men were tired, and they were well trained. I didn't try to do any more training. By that time, I was a company commander when we left Oran, and so my training for them was I'd give them about a 5-mile run every morning in that deep sand along the beach. And
That'll keep them in shape.
after that, they were free to go. They'd go to town, get tanked up on wine, Vino. The next morning, you could smell them 5 miles down the wind. That Vino start pouring out of them. Well, from there, we made the invasion of Sicily. And as usual, the engineer troops were the first ones in. We did the work the Marines did in the Pacific.
That's it.
Combat engineers, you know, they're trained as infantrymen and trained as demolition mines and the whole bit. Well, we landed at Gala, and the British landed to our east, and the 3rd Division landed to our west. Patton was in command of the whole deal, and it was known as I Armored Corps. Well, the mission of the 1st Division was to race as hard as it could north and split the island in half. Well, that was a good idea, except that the damn roads were, you know, that's mountainous country up through there, and there were deep ravines crossing. They'd ride ridge roads, and maybe 2-lane highways, good concrete 2-lane highways. But there were ravines cutting across the road, well, which there were bridges built. And I think I could get the exact figures, but I think we built 21 bypasses where the bridge was blown, and it'd leave a light covering for us. We'd fight the covering for us off, and then take our dozers and cut down. There were dry ravines, luckily. There was no water. But some of them were huge.
I can imagine, yeah.
And we just slogged our way up through there, you might say, till we got up around Alameda. Well, the British were having trouble over on their side. They had a big, broad highway going up to cross over to Italy. But they were having trouble, and so we got diverted to break over to the east instead of going to Cefalù. We never did get to Cefalù, which was the point on the coast would cut the island in half. So we went up then to the northeast, and about that time I had gotten hit lightly with a piece of 20-millimeter shell in my hip around the last ridge that I was working on, and I'd got malaria. In fact, my whole company was away from me, just loaded with malaria. Well, I was starting to go out of my head, and my wound had festered. They had never gone even to the aid station. I didn't realize there was a piece of shrapnel still in there. And so I just turned into a field hospital. I have no memory after getting into that field hospital until I woke up in Algiers in a enlisted man's ward. I'd lost my helmet. My dog tags had disappeared, and we just had war fatigues. Apparently my signal was gone, and they just shipped me on, and I ended up in an enlisted man ward. And after I came around, you know, that tertiary malaria, it took me down. I weighed about 185 when we went into Sicily, and I was down to 123 pounds.
When you got wounded, were you hit? Was that the aircraft shell?
No, 20 millimeter explosive rounds that the Italians had.
That's it.
The machine guns, 20 millimeter machine guns. You could tell they're explosive rounds. I knew I'd gotten hit, but I thought it was a concrete chip. They fired close to me, and these chips flew up from the explosive round, and I got a face full of them. And then I felt this sting right on my right hip. Well, I'd been in Africa. I had a rather funny one. I thought I was hit there because I had that warm, wet feeling, and it turned out the bullet had gone through my canteen. My leg soaked, and I thought it was blood because I didn't see it behind me. Anyhow, I was in Africa, again in Algiers, I guess for almost a month, until I got, as soon as I had jaundice along with it, and I got everything looked yellow, my fingernails were purple, my lips were purple, until I got back up to about 160 pounds. And I got rumors to the effect that their unit was going to move. So I went AWOL from the hospital and managed to catch a plane. It was a ATC troop plane, one of these C-47s. And it was the last plane. They were moving their headquarters over to Sicily. And on the way over, it was handled by a warrant officer, was a pilot, and the sergeant was a co-pilot, and that's all that was in there. A bunch of junk, typewriters, and tent poles on the back. And here I was hanging sort of in the bucket seat. All of a sudden, it sounded like a rivet gun went off. I looked up, and here, about the hole spaced across the fuselage, about that far apart. A German plane had apparently been over strafing in North Africa and emptied his guns on this plane. Well, the pilot hit the deck, gave it evasive action, and then he pulled back. The German plane just made one pass, and he pulled back up, and the sergeant came out and said, Captain, said, have you ever jumped? I said, no, I went off a tower in Benning just for the hell of it. He said, well, let me show you how to get in the chute. I said, I'll go down with you. He said, sir, we're not going down. Take a look out the window. You know, they had those round portholes. I looked out there, and the port side engine the propeller was feathered, and there was a greasy smoke coming out of it. And he said, we don't think we can last, as we're about 16 miles out from Sicily. You could barely discern blur. So we can make it on in to there. And then we're going to turn and send the plane out to the Med, and we're going to jump. Well, we got over Sicily, and as he made his turn, he opened the door, and I stood in that door. He'd hooked me up to the static line. I about to turn around and tell him, hell, I can't take that first step. My boot hit me in the back, and out I went. Well, it was all right until you started about 20, well, maybe 50 feet from the ground. Then it was coming up like a locomotive. And I tried to remember pull on my shroud line, bend my knees and roll. And the wind caught me. Took all the tail end of my pants out over that rocky soil. I got the chute knocked down and walked to a low wall. There was a road. And I went over the wall. I bundled up the chute because it made good neckties, you know. And my God, there came one of my own A Company Jeeps. You know, we had our bumpers painted, 1E, and the number of the vehicle, A, and the number of the vehicle. And there was one of my Jeeps. I got in, rode about half a mile, and I was in my own bivouac.
Unbelievable.
It really is. Those things just amaze you. Some of the things that happen.
Right.
Well, anyway, after that, the battalion stayed there, I guess, about a month after I got back. I took over the company again. Oh, I got a reply by endorsement started from the hospital and all the way up and back down. Said the following named officer is absent without leave from 734th General Hospital. Please reply by endorsement the punishment he's received. I wrote on the bottom of it, the above named officer has been restricted to the company area for a period of 2 weeks. And Charles E. Murphy, captain. So there's another humorous one. Anyway, we went from there, we went back to England. And the battalion was sent to the south of England. My company was went to a little town by the name of Charmouth. It was the mouth of the Shar River, and it was supposedly the point where Norman the Conqueror had landed. Well, ostensibly, we were supposed to be guarding the coast, but in reality, we were doing night training, getting ready for, we knew we were going to hit Normandy. And this is in December, early December when we landed. Well, we kept training, but I gave them all the passes. They were going to England all the time, and we were really adopted by the town. They put on dances for us, and we put on dances for them, you know, and the whole bit. And they just looked on us as bare troops.
Mm-hmm.
Well, things went along pretty well until about May, and then they had us building these training program material to make it look like they were dummies. To make it look like we even they're blowing up rubber tanks and that sort of thing. It was part of this confusion bit. Then, of course, we all loaded up, and that was the biggest mess of ships I ever saw in my life. We went out of Bournemouth, and my God, I've never seen so many ships. There must have been 300 or 400 of them, all types.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, on June the 6th, we hit Normandy. Now that was a real strap. I had studied. We had good, very good intelligence. We had excellent pictures. In fact, I can show you some of the ones where low-flying airplanes had. Boy, the people in the Germans out there putting in their emplacements were that big. So I knew where we were going to hit. We were going to hit on Omaha Easy Red. And my company's mission was to, of course, knock out the beach obstacles. The underwater obstacles would be taken out by the Navy. I guess they were SEALs. Mm-hmm. And there was a whole additional engineer battalion sent in. And I nominally had command of about 1,250 men. I decided I'd go in early. We weren't due to hit there until H+30. Supposed to have been a heavy bombing concentration on there to give us shell holes. Now, you look at that picture and you saw the shingle, which was high tide, about 200 yards, and you were going up a cliff, which was about 200 feet. Between there, you had minefield, wire, and a 60-foot deep, about a 40-foot wide anti-tank beach. Up to the right was a pillbox, which had an 88 and I don't know how many machine guns. Now, we were supposed to knock that mess out. And we were supposed to get it by noon. I mean, no, wait a minute, H+2 hours. We were supposed to get vehicles through. Well, I got there, and when I hit the beach, first thing, we got a boat that I came in. I went in with just my radio operator and my runner ahead of my company coming in. And the first thing, a mortar shell hit the ramp. And we couldn't knock it down, so we had to go to the side. And we went in the water up to about here. And, of course, we had full field equipment on, the May West around it. We started on in, and, boy, we were catching hell from mortar fire and machine gun fire. They had that place really, so when we took over, we could see there were, oil-painted pictures alongside their mortar, concrete emplacements for their mortars, concrete trenches, and pictures giving the range and the sighting direction for almost every little obstacle around there. So they had it locked. As soon as I hit the beach, my operator and my runner were killed. I got hit. I had my field glasses up here, and I felt like I got kicked by a mule, and I just went out. I came to with the water washing the back of my neck, and I couldn't move my left arm or my left leg. What had happened is that arm-piercing round had hit my field glasses, ricocheted around in there, and then came out and rode this rib. Well, you can imagine absorbing that impact right here over your left chest. Had just deadened the nerve. In about an hour, I crawled up to the shingle, just crab-like, and I was covered then from direct fire. And in about an hour, feeling came back. Initially, I was scared to death. I was afraid to reach and feel how big a hole it was. You know that? I guess you've heard that feeling before.
I can imagine.
I got up to the shingle, and about that time, my outfit started coming in. And we went to work on that mess, and they brought a destroyer in. He wasn't 150 yards offshore. and he just pounded that 88 millimeter. Well, by that time, when I figured it out, by noon, I had less than 50 men in the original group I was in command out of 1,250. The rest, I didn't know where the hell they were. Most of them were dead because they didn't get them off and they drowned, wounded. And the beach was littered with every kind of trash you can imagine. Half-tracks, tanks, DD tanks that bogged down and they just barely gotten in, and then they gotten hit. And it was just an absolute rat's nest. But we managed to get that damn thing cleaned out. A couple of bulldozers had come in, and the people apparently had been killed because we couldn't find them. So I mounted them with our troops, and we cleaned out. And as you saw from that, we had the only exit that was open on D-Day. And that was open by about 2 o'clock. And everything from both beaches started funneling in there. My God, if you could have seen the mess of trying to get them shingled out and spread on up in toward you go right into the hedgerow country, right off the beach. And we got as far as Comont, and we found we were sitting out there all by our lonesome. Nobody else. We were 20 miles inland, and nobody else was off the beach. If anybody had hit us, we'd have been rough. Well, from then on, we fought through the hill country, and we developed a method whereby we could take our dozers and knock a hole through and then back out real quick. Of course, they concentrate their fire on that hole. They were at the next hedgerow, maybe 100 yards. They had automatic weapons and sub-smasher rifles, and sub-automatic. We break through another one on the other side. Now they had to split their fire and charge them.
Let's see.
Throw a few grenades and use grenade launchers and charge them. We just fought piece by piece, 100 yards at a time. They're lucky if we made 500 yards in a day. Finally, we broke out of there, and we headed down toward, oh no, not quite. We then headed out and got fairly open territory, but Saint-Lô was where they were heavily garrisoned. So they brought in a 1,000 plane on Saint-Lô. And the 4th Division was the division they were supposed to attack, break an opening, and we were to dash through. Well, they tried for 3 days, and they couldn't get in. So finally, they reversed the situation. They had us, the 1st Division, tack through, and then the 4th was follow on and exploit the breakthrough. They brought in another 1,000 plane raid. And we went in like it was mush. We didn't have any trouble with them. I don't know what happened to the 4th, because it was a fighting outfit. Well, we just ran right over them. Took Saint-Lô. And then that's when Patton's 3rd Army came in. He took command of the 3rd Army, just banded together the various Army troops. And we were put as engineer troops with that 3rd Army. And we just raced across Europe. Until, in fact, it was a funny little deal. We were heading to the northeast, up toward Belgium. And the Germans were racing eastward too, only they were north of us. They were trying to get out of the pocket. We got to Ballet Gap and captured a potload of them there. And one night, I had orders. We broke down into regimental combat teams. Are you familiar with that term?
No.
What it consisted of a regiment of infantry, a company of engineers, a battalion of artillery, a company of medics, detachment, signal detachment, ordnance detachment, and a quartermaster detachment. So you were almost a complete little fighting team. Well, of course, being A company, I was attached to the 16th Infantry. There were 16th, 18th, and 26th. And the way it went, A company went with the 16th, B with the 18th, and C with the 26th. These were the infantry regiments. I got orders that I was to meet at a certain road junction and fall in behind a line of tanks. I was to be there at 0100, fall in behind a line of tanks, and I would be the lead unit behind the tanks, and then the infantry regiment would fall in on my tail. Well, we got there at about 24:45, and at 0100 the tanks were still rolling. So we waited and waited and waited, and finally everything was just pin light, the little tiny slitted lights. And finally, at about 0130, there was a hole, and we pulled in it. Went roll on down the road, not worrying about a damn thing. And finally, the column slowed down, pulled off the road into the shoulder there, a fairly wide, grassy shoulder. And I had my men just pull off, and they bedded down their trucks or outside. The engineers were totally motorized. We had about 21 vehicles per company. And that included half tracks and air compressor and all our working tools. Anyhow, at about just about before daylight, just at that break, I was in a CNR, Command Reconnaissance, the company commander rode nose with the first sergeant, and shook me. He says, "Captain, look up there." I said, "Yeah, it's tanks." He says, "Look at them closely, sir." He said, "Can't they look like German tanks?" And I said, "Oh, well, we captured a lot of them. We used to capture them, and then they'd paint a big white star on them." Well, these didn't have any white star on them. So I said, "Well, grab your rifle and grab a carbine. We're going to investigate this mess." And I picked up a little radio. We'd gotten some good little FM radios by that time. The original radios that had the AMs with the powder to blow. Well, I got up to where I could see about 3 or 4 tanks, and well, they were German tanks. Of course, they were traveling with their 88 slung behind them. As far as I could see, they were German tanks. So I got on the radio with my platoon commanders, and I said, "Get your platoons up here and bring plenty of grenades." And I said, "The first platoon, you take the left side, the second, the right side, and the third, you split equally. And just move up as far as you can see German tanks. When I blow this whistle, you get in there and you get those hatches open and drop grenades in." And we got 30 tanks that day, and didn't get a scratch. Yeah, they took the crowbar off and just wrenched they had a crowbar slung on their tanks, wrenched the damn hatch open. Some of them were already open. They're supposed to, I guess, they had sentries there. And we got 30 tanks. And then there was a mess. And the guy in the 3rd Armored that was with us, the lieutenant, he came back and he says, "Captain, what are you going to do with these tanks?" And I said, "I'm going to fool the thing with them." I said, "We'll probably have to roll them off the road if we can get them started." He said, "Can I have them?" I said, "Sure." He says, "I got to know how to run them." So they painted these white stars on them, and they got picked up 30 Tiger tanks. Well, the men, most of them, I guess 3/4 of them were killed when those, can you imagine a grenade dropped down the inside of the tank? Maybe 3 or 4 of them. I guess they got about maybe 20 prisoners. And then I left them with the 3rd Armored. I didn't know what the hell to do with them. So we went on driving and got into Mons, Belgium, and then Liège. And we had some fights, not much, around the Siegfried line there. We got into a little bit of a, memory of that is a little unclear. We just kept on fighting from then until we got down into Czechoslovakia. We had a funny experience there. We took Aachen then, of course. In fact, my company was the first company into Aachen. That was the first German border we crossed. And then Czechoslovakia, I got as far as Carlsbad, Czechoslovakia. And then I got orders to pull back because I was both beyond the damn line they had drawn. Remember they drew that political line? Yeah. And I got orders to pull back. We had completely disarmed the town, and had a standard. We'd get into Germantown if we sat down for any, say, overnight. I'd go into the Burgermeister and jerk him back and say, "I want every roadblock knocked down. I want every rifle, pistol, shotgun, or whatever out here within 2 hours. And if they're not here, I'm going to shoot you." Boy, we no business. Well, we had done that to this town of Carlsbad. Well, we got orders to pull back to Marienbad, that the Russians were going to come in to Carlsbad. Well, I thought I'd wait and meet them. And they came in like the town was absolutely fortified, and it was the nastiest nasty you ever saw. I never saw so much looting and raping going on in my. I just got disgusted and got in their teeth and went back to Marion and said, by God, if they come here, we're going to kill them. And then we spent maybe 2 months there across the line from the Russians with about a 10-mile buffer stretch. Well, as soon as they got settled in, I went over to meet this guy and this Russian captain. Well, first, he was captain when the first time I met him. And the next time I went back, he had been upgraded to a major and he tried to pull rank on me. And I told him right cold. I said, now listen here, we had to work through interpreters. He didn't speak English and I didn't speak Russian, but I had a man who spoke both German and Russian. And I said, tell that SOB that an American private is better educated, knows more about fighting than a Russian general. Now, cut this crap out. And my God, he was the last of it. So, after that, I guess we went up into Germany, a place called Markburgel, and took over an area that had been a training camp. We had Germans who used as work troops. They built a huge swimming pool, a big, I mean, it was full, and a big officers club and the NCOs club, and just set it up like we were in the States. And the word came down that anybody with 75 points or more was eligible to go back to the States. Well, I had 125 points. This was given to you for your time overseas, wounds and decorations and that sort of bit. About that time, I was getting pretty heavy rumbles that we were going to go back down south of France as a division and start training and then go through the Suez Canal and be the lead division in Japan. Well, by that time, I was pretty gray and pretty well trained.
Imagine.
There I'd made 3 divisions. I know if I make an invasion, if I make the invasion of Japan, there ain't no way.
No, you never come out of that line.
No way. So I took the break.
Right.
I shipped back to the States, and
Get back in the States.
where?
When?
Oh, Jesus.
Just approximately.
I lost count of time and got to thinking of the spaces. I can tell in a while. Can we hold that at that date? We landed at Patrick Henry. This now was just a conglomerate of organizations. I happened to be CO troops. There was about 5,000 of them on a small ship called the Cristobal. Cristobal, really. We called it the Cristobal. And we landed at Patrick Henry. And then went into Abernathy, I guess it was, near Indianapolis, Camp Abernathy. I didn't pay much attention to it. And
Take 2, and I believe we left off where you had a few minutes ago where you returned to the States.
returned to the States, John.
Read the date on that.
I don't know the exact date, but it was October
Okay.
1944.
Okay, just take it from there again then. What went on after that?
Well, I had quite a bit of terminal leave, about a month and a half, and my brother-in-law, who was a medical officer, came in about the same time, and we just enjoyed. We lived in the house in Knoxville that Charlotte's father had been the dean of agriculture.
That's right.
And he had a home there on Yale Avenue, which is now Volunteer Boulevard.
Right.
And we lived there for about a month and a half. And I started looking for work as an engineer, and I had an offer from both out here, K-25, and one from Alcoa.
Mm-hmm.
But Alcoa was on strike, and my funds were getting a little low about this time. I'd gotten my final pay. Yeah?
I can take the big car.
Yeah? No, go ahead. It's got plenty of gas in it.
You want me to move on?
No, she can take the big car.
I'll believe you all, but I can remember the dates. I was back in Knoxville with a little baby. I can remember this because I kept up with that war.
She knew the dates of everything that was happening, whereas, of course, my letters were very badly censored. She knew very little about where we were.
Yeah. Right.
And the dates became blurred in my mind. It was more the location. I could tell you the town after town that we went through. Good.
Yeah, I could see where you lose track of time.
Well, hell, every day was the same.
Yeah.
Didn't make a difference whether it was Monday or
Mm-hmm.
the only difference was the weather.
Right.
So I finally took a job out at K-25.
Let me ask you a question. Back when you were in Europe and Sicily, North Africa, did you have any contact with the Allied troops, the English or the French?
In Africa?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You see, as I told you, when we initially got up in Tunisia, well, I also had contact. I found out that the French had a mine manual. We had no manuals concerning German or Italian mines.
Okay.
The French had one, and they after Oran, they sent some of their officers to be trained on their weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Because the plan was, if all of North Africa went free French, we would arm them, which we did.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out there was a Lieutenant Santel who was with the Spahis. I don't know whether that word means anything to you. I don't think it doesn't have much to do with the war. And he said, yes, they had a mine manual. And allowed me to go over to Tlemcen. That's Tlemcen, which is in Morocco. And I went over there and stayed with him a weekend and managed to get permission from his colonel to bring his mine manual back. And of course, we copied it and sent it around to our own troops and then sent it back to Belvoir. And it was the first German, knowledge of Germans that they'd ever received. So we got to know the French fairly well.
What did you think of the French and
I thought that the French in Africa, you may have to turn that back on.
Yeah, I think you did.
The French in Africa, especially their native troops. Now, the Spahis were Berbers, Moroccans.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a little story here that you might want to read. Their name themselves is Goon. And they turned out to be the best scouts you ever had in your life. They could move like shadows. I went out, and this is the story of the patrol I went out with. And they had a custom that's supposed to have dated back to Roman times, where they would cut the throat of every other sentry and take his left ear. Now, the left ear was worth 1,000 francs, which is roughly then about $10. A lot of them didn't turn them in. They wore them around under the bella as a necklace. They'd dry them in the sun, and they were like a wallet. And that was proof of both their affluence and their bravery. Mm-hmm. And they were wonderful troops. Now, I didn't really get to see much of the Zouaves, the real predators. We ran into them early up in Tunisia, and got orders of them, they'd hold maybe a flank on each side of us, and they seemed to hold all right.
You didn't, in Sicily, did you have any contact with the Allied troops?
Not at all there. In fact, when we took the Italians there, we didn't bother to disarm them. We just waved them on back. They didn't want to fight very hell. Now, the 10th Mountain Division gave us a fit up there around Etna. There was a pretty good story that these same goons had been accused of taking a whole town and murdering about half of them and raping the women. I knew that for a fact, that they shot all the males. Well, that was what they were doing in the Sahara.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, those tribes there fight like it's like a piratical sea.
Kind of like the Africans are doing now.
Right.
The Zulus fighting with the other tribes. Okay, let's see. We're back in the States now, and you have an offer from Alcoa.
Yes.
And
K-25, Union Carbide.
Right.
Well, Alcoa was on strike, and the dollars were about the same, so I decided, what the hell. Not only that, but if I came out here, I'd be given a house, and which incidentally is this house.
You've been here that long?
Been there that long. Of course, you'd never recognize what it originally looked like.
Sure.
I completely rebuilt it, and when they first pulled up here, I laughed. Charlotte broke into tears. Looked there, and she said, "You mean I'm going to have to live in that?" Of course, there was boardwalks, no concrete walks, and mud all over. And
Yes, after Yale Avenue, that was quite a come down.
oh, that was really coming down. And before I went overseas, she was down in Camp Blanding, Florida, and she was pregnant. I had the car up at Indiantown Gap, and I was given 4 days of emergency leave to go down and get her, bring her up, rent an apartment in Knoxville, get a telephone, make arrangements at the hospital, get my aunt down from Baltimore.
4 days.
And I did it. I was back.
You had to, I guess.
Well, I had to be back in a certain time. And she lived in an apartment there near Fort Sanders, which that was pretty good in those days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was pretty nice up there. Okay, and then how long did you stay then with Carbide?
I've been here ever since.
Ever since.
I moved back and forth. I worked at K-25 initially in what they called their test and equipment group. And then they started redesign to upgrade the plants, and I got into that design group, and we upgraded K-25. From there, we did the design work for Paducah, and then for Portsmouth. Of course, that design work, actually, they had an architect engineer, Gibbles and Valet, but half the time they would take our drawings and rub out our name and stamp it Gibbles and Valet, and that was all it was done. Then send them back for our review. And from there, I moved to Y-12. I don't know whether you ever knew they were going to try to make a nuclear plane.
No.
Now, I was on that project for a long while, I guess for about 2 years, and I came to the conclusion it was going to be a dodo. They could get the power, but the shielding, my God, it was all concrete. And my guess was that the maximum speed would never gotten above 200 miles per hour. And it would have been a huge thing. And I just called up a friend of mine, an old Army friend who was over at ORNL, and said, "Hey, you want a good electrical engineer?" He said, "Sure do." He said, "When can you come to work?" I said, "Tomorrow." I just walked off. ORNL. Hired in over there. And they took all the paperwork. And it was surprising because ordinarily there was a buffer to prevent people from going from one plant to the other. I made from K-25 to Y-12 and to RNL, nobody even scratching their head. Of course, I had top secret clearance.
Mm-hmm.
Had to for the work on the design of the K-25 plants. A lot about the details of things.
How many years were you worked out here?
I worked about 35 years.
What year did you retire?
Well, I retired a little early. It's been 10 years ago. And this is 90, maybe it was 81. It was 81.
Okay.
That adds up, but that's roughly
Well, that's
the picture.
roughly it. Okay.
And of course, I was completely active in horses all the time. And you can take a look here and you can see some of the pictures out in the kitchen I had sort of bit. And just recently, I've been set down off of horses by the medico. So I've been painting and writing. That's about what I'm doing. I'm trying to make interesting stories out of some of the stuff I do.
That's interesting, I'll tell you.
You might. There's a little